Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly show H panel on UND Media. Today, we'll be talking about what we started last week, the war, and specifically, we'll be talking about the expansion and the raging of the war, what the international community and domestic actors are reacting, or how they are reacting, if any. And the original H panel full house is on air now. We are live on our channel, and this will be aired as well on our satellite to the Horn of Africa. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's great to
Thank you,
have
thank you.
Yosef as well to the panel. Today we'll start with Faisal, and as usual, the format is the same. We start with what stood out for the panelists, was the highlight in their view, each of them, and then we'll be diving into the topic of the day. Often, more often than not, at least, the what is the highlight, is related to the war or to the topic. So let's start, Faisal. What stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Thank you very much. And, welcome my colleagues. I think what stands out is the expanding conflict in northern Ethiopia, the resumption of the war between Tigray and the rest of the Ethiopian forces, if you will, the joint Ethiopian forces consisting of Ethiopian National Defense Force, Amara Militia, Amara Liu Police, and others. And now the Eritrean forces have officially joined the conflict. I think there have been a lot of bloodshed so far, a lot of prisoners on one side. Uh, Ethiopian soldiers somehow in droves being captured or giving themselves to the TDF, Tigray Defense Force, and now the couple of potential and possible fronts that could expand the scope of the war, which is the north around Shrere and then the west of Tigray, Walgait and Humara, which could really show the level of the devastation in this conflict. Having said that, I think the other side of this equation is the failure of the international community to do anything about this conflict. For the last 1 year, international communities, particularly the United States, have been sending back and forth envoys, and all those envoys were nothing but anything but permanent. We have seen, envoy individuals being changed regularly. Now we are the third, I believe, Mike Hammer, who, as of today, as we speak, has been reported by several news media that he's sent back to Addis to go back. Probably he's left or he will go tomorrow. Too little, too late, I don't know. But I think, as many newspapers, including Reuters and Alexi Diwal and on BBC and other outlets, have already expressed, it looks like you know this resumption of conflict happened because there's no mediation, there's no serious play by the international groups, and there doesn't seem to be a structured talks sponsored by either the United States or others. So one can say that the two sides, whichever one, have come into the last line of their secret talks. As we know, two times they met, but that didn't work simply because the siege of the Tigray region is the bigger, obstacle here. Ethiopian side is not willing to lift, although it's saying it's ready to lift. It has been slow, and the TDF, TPLF has become impatient. I really don't care who shot the first bullet, because that's the simplistic way to approach. I think the big picture is why this war again came back, and what is the big issue that could have been the cause for this. And the big issue that could have been the cause for the resumption of the war is, number one, in my opinion, the refusal of the Ethiopian government to lift the siege, to let services come back to Tigray, and to let food aid and medical aid go to Tigray, you know, unabated, with no condition. I think that creates on both sides a conflict. But the other failure and the other side to this conflict, as I said, is the inability of the international community, i.e., the U.S. interlocutor role, being unproductive and did not bring any result at this point to the table. As we recall, since the war was conflict stopped, there has not been any tangible gain on both sides except a limited release of food aid to Tigray. Limited, I would say. As of today, I think Reuters compared the numbers of people who were suffering before food aid was let and now, and I think you are talking about higher number of people not having enough access to food and other aid. So basically, you can say that TDF hasn't gained anything from the cessation of hostility before, and now we are back to square one.
Thank you, Faisal. To your point, so this is the press briefing today from the White House, and you see here that Ambassador Mike Hammer will travel to Ethiopia starting this weekend. That's what they are saying, to engage on the crisis. And they mentioned about the condemning the Eritrea's re-entry into the conflict, the continuing TPLF offensive outside of Tigray, and the Ethiopian government's airstrikes. So in one bulk. Zgal, what is the highlight for you this week?
Of course, the highlight is in the context of the re-escalation, or sometimes mistakenly described as a resumption of the war. That was the headline story. So, in that context, what caught me by surprise is the speed with which this war unfolded, and I'm really perplexed how quickly the Ethiopian National Defense Forces crumbled on all fronts. Um, the evidence is from the Kobo front initially, and um, if it is true or not, we don't know. But 23 divisions, the crumbling of 23 divisions, that was reported by the Tigray Defense Forces force. It should be astounding to anybody. If anybody doubts, look at the number of war prisoners who were driven to walk from Kobo, the Kobo area, all the way through Koram, through Alamata, all to Mekelle. I'm not sure they're in Mekelle yet, but they're walking. And they didn't seem to care that they were captured. They were not heavily guarded by Tigray Defense Forces. They were just walking, apparently unperturbed that they were captured, and almost content. They seemed that they're taken prisoners of war, and that really surprised me that they seem to to um, to not care that they're prisoners of war. Maybe that is a testament that being a prisoner of war is better than to serve in the Ethiopian army in this senseless and meaningless war. Um, Meaningless war that all of Ethiopia is right now asking or questioning what the purpose is. So I am absolutely astounded that in 5 or 6 days since the start of the war, maybe a little bit more than that, about 8 days, uh, devastating damage was inflicted upon Ethiopian National Defense Forces. Now, I've heard stories from the war front that the ENDF reintegrated the prisoners of war that the Tigray government released some months ago as a gesture of goodwill to speed up the negotiation process, as was agreed upon between the two heads of the the two heads, that is the head of the Tigray Defense Force and the Ethiopian um, chief of staff. I heard that these former POWs were integrated into the army. I don't know if any army in the world had done that. Any army had actually reintegrated captured POWs back into fighting force. And what I heard is that as soon as the shooting started, uh, these prisoners, or former prisoners of war, turned out to be organizers of mass surrender. What that portends, we might be able to talk about it later on. But this is the headline. But in the context of the headline, there is a raging war that is happening in Oromia. While the eyes of the world, while the eyes of most Ethiopians were focused on the re escalation of the war in the northern front, and when I say that, I say that advisedly, that this is the front, because there is a total civil war in Ethiopia in all corners. And what we really talk about right now is the northern front, the northern front of the Ethiopian civil war. While this was happening, Fano militias from Amhara, Fano militants, and Amhara special forces and other Amhara regional states forces crossed over the Blue Nile to the northern part of Walega, the Horogudru zone, uh, and uh, and massacred about 62 defenseless residents in Agamsa town of Horogudru zone in northern Wallaga. The numbers are climbing. I have heard as many as 100 or even more. Many are displaced, and you've probably seen some of the pictures. So, what is taken together, what is really surprising to me um, is the fact that there is hidden war in Oromia. As bad as it is in the north, there is also an invisible war that is going on in Oromia. The calculation is, or the story is, the headline is that the Ethiopian Defense Forces that were stationed in the Wallaga region to fight the OLA have withdrawn, and indeed some have withdrawn. But special forces have not left. Special forces from the Amara region, the Oromia regional government have not left. They were trying to ferret out, to flush out the Oromo Liberation Army and kill it. Because that was not happening, they are simply killing anyone that they found on the street. So the brutality, the utter brutality of this government was in display in the northern front, but was invisibly also was going on in the western front in the Wallaga region. That is really something that one needs to pay attention to while focused on the re-escalation in the northern front.
Thank you, Stan. Last week in our show, we showed where the hotspots in terms of war is. So it's almost everywhere in the country, but the big hotspots are in Tigray and Western Oromia. Yosef, welcome again again after so many months of absence.
So many.
Yeah. What is the highlight for
All right.
maybe go beyond the 7 days as well?
Well, more or less, it's the same thing that Faisal and Hezkel have been saying. I was amazed also at the extent of almost you could say total meltdown of the Endf. The collapse is astounding. I believe it's not only the preparation of the TDF that has been the main factor over here, but also I think there is no will to fight. You could see it, as Hezkel has said, among the prisoners. There is no will to fight at all among the ENDF soldiers. There is some kind of will, probably it might exist among the Amhara militias or Fanos, probably to some extent. But else than that, there is no will to fight. That's what I have surmised from the pictures that we have seen. Remember that it said 20 something divisions, huh? And one division is about 5,000 at minimum, which means it's more than 100, probably 120,000 soldiers were involved at at the beginning of this fight. And not all of them have been, killed or surrendered. Many of them have also escaped both to the southern part, to Eldia, and some of them have escaped also to the Sokota area. So there are two fronts. One is the southern front, the Kobo front. The other one is the Sokota front. So the Sokota front, the war for the Sokota front is going on right now. In fact, the latest news is that on the road from, remember a few days back, the Eritrean, I'm sorry, the Ethiopian airline flights to Lalibela. The people were surprised at the number of flights in those 3 days. That was they were trying to save or let's call it salvage the Sokota front. They gave up on the Kobo front, but they were trying to salvage the Sokota front because there was a huge number also of I don't know exactly how many divisions there were. Today we have heard that on Hamusit is probably past the Lalibela Sokota road. So they cut off that road. The TDF cut off that road, and that means they isolated the Sokota front from the Lalibela front. And then they said that 3 divisions of Endf, Ethiopian forces, were destroyed, trying to make the connection between Lalibela and to re-establish the connection between Lalibela and Sokota. So right at this moment, the same kind of destruction that happened in the Kobo front is happening right now on the Sokota front, which means that the entire southern front, which includes both the Kobo front, which is now the Weldia front, and the Sokota front, has totally collapsed. So the only forces that remain, in substantive numbers, are the Western Front and the one is which is tens of thousands that has been transferred to Eritrea. Those are the only functional Ethiopian forces that are left. And today we have heard the war at Aderkai has started. The war of Aderkai, which means it's the Zarema front. On the Ethiopian side, it will be the Zarema front. We don't know exactly what happened over there. On the Eritrean front, on the northern front, people, I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Up to today, the morning today, it was only artillery. The Eritreans were using only artillery. They have been kind of shocked by the extent of the meltdown of the Ethiopian forces. So they don't know exactly what to do. We will probably talk about that later. But in Eritrea, there is this to get in or not to get in inside Tigray. That has been one of the main dilemma that Eritrea is facing right now. Whether to get into Tigray with all its force, or whether to fight at the front in the trenches only. So we'll see exactly what happens. But that is, as Faisal and Hizkiel said, to me what was surprising was the extent of the collapse of the Ethiopian army. It's unheard of. The late count was more than 6,000 prisoners have been captured only on the southern front. So imagine if 6,000 prisoners have been captured, how many of them are killed, how many of them are wounded, and how many of them have been dispersed. You can imagine. It's almost a total wipeout. How did the TDF did this? I don't know. So we will have to, wait and see exactly what did happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. On that account, we heard the commander of Tigray Army or Tigray Defense Forces, General Tadessa Warada, talking about mainly how it started and how the Kobo front went. And at that point, he was mentioning about 5,000 POWs. One thing that maybe Faisali may start is on the domestic, and we touched it last week as well, but maybe with more days and more information, if we can talk about how the international community as well as the domestic different stakeholders are reacting to this. I just want to play. He's a former ISAT journalist. He's reportedly reporting from the ground, from the front, and he's talking about how the farmers are feeling, how the farmers express explicitly they are willing, to let the TDF pass through and so on. So let me play that, and you will react into the topic of the day.
ዛሬ አንዳንድ ወጣቶች በየቦታው እንደውም ይምጡ እነዚህ ሰዎች እንደውም ይለፉ እና እዛው 4 ኪሎ ገብተው ጉዱን ባየ ነው ብሎ የሚል ወጣትም ገጥሞኛል። አንድ ብቻ አይደለም፣ ብዙ ወጣቶች ለምን ያሳዳቸው ነበር። በጣም ብዙ ነገር ሲል ነበር መንግስት። ታውቁታላችሁ እሱ ሲል የነበረው መቼም አሁን ምድገማ አስፈላጊ አይደለም። በዚያ ያኮረፈ ወጣት አለ።
And in that same clip, he's talking about farmers as well, how they have, they had peace before the last 4 years, at least in their area, and now they are, the battleground and so on. So, Faisal, back to you.
Yeah, yeah. On the military front, just one item I like to add to what Joseph and Eskel say is that I think at the last ditch, the Endf side used some of the Republican Guard in that front of Kopo and that area, and even that Republican Guard seems to have succumbed and lost, and a lot of them have been captured, and we saw those captured prisoners of war on the media. I think I'll just quickly try to tie what the general said and what that young journalist. You want to play this or what?
Go ahead.
And yeah, that's what the general said a few days ago, and what that young journalist from ISAT, often known to be a huge propaganda machine for the government side, for him to say that there is a change of attitude of the Amara residents in the conflict area, including the youth and farmers, is really a shift, a paradigm shift from what the attitude was last time. Particularly politicized young men and women who were in the Amara region, in the past conflict, were exceptionally, without question, siding the government. I think at this point in time, there are fissures and cracks that we see. Those cracks seem to be related to what the general said in his delivery of the message, where he made an open appeal to the people of the Amara region, basically saying that you guys are our brothers and sisters. We are not coming here to harm you or do anything to you, to defend our interests and our existence and what have you. So basically, it looks like on the one hand, the TDF is appealing to the Amara masses to not see them as enemy. On the other hand, you see some people buying and accepting that message. How much and how many and how deep the acceptance of that message is, it's too early to tell. But definitely, the messaging of the conflict is this time different from what it was last time. And the reception of the message coming from TDF by Amara residents is different. We have also seen the same thing of attitudinal change by a lot of activists who are in the media, who really this time say, uh, you know, the war is not in our interest. I think what this tapestry of information, anecdotal information tells you is that there is a decline of the legitimacy. Not that these people like TDF or want TDF, but I think there is a sharp decline of legitimacy of the government of Abiy, even more so between now and last time. That decline of legitimacy seems to be
Is it only for me or Faisal is cut off? You can hear me?
He's cut off. He's cut off. Yeah.
It's cut off, right? Okay, so
I can hear you now. Yeah, he's cut off. Yeah.
yeah, I think his video is even frozen, so he will come back hopefully. So on the same topic, Skal, you heard today the press secretary in the White House talking about how they see the parties into in the conflict. So let me just play this specific clip from the press briefing today.
President Biden's special envoy for the Horn of Africa will travel to Ethiopia starting this weekend to engage on the crisis in northern Ethiopia. Special Envoy Hammer will convey that all parties should halt military operations and engage in peace talks. We condemn Eritrea's re-entry into the conflict, the continuing TPLF offensive outside Tigray, and the Ethiopian government's airstrikes. There is no military solution to the conflict. Prior to renewed hostilities, we were encouraged by 5 months of humanitarian truce and are now deeply concerned about the seizure of humanitarian assistance of military use. All parties should exercise restraint, and we urge de-escalation by all actors, particularly so that there can be a resumption of humanitarian relief and basic services to all parties in need.
Skal, you react to that, but Faisal is back, so let Faisal finish his points, and I'll get back to you. Faisal, you were cut off, so we couldn't hear you, and I think...
Yeah, I was basically saying that the continued loss of ground is by the Endf, by the Ethiopian National Defense Force, and is an indication of legitimacy being lost by the administration of Abiy. The attitudinal change that we see by in the Amara region, is whether it's the youth or some farmers, is really an indication that there is a dearth of legitimacy that the Abiy government is experiencing, and that really has some sort of negative impact on how the war is conducted. And it's not only military, as my colleague is touched; it's also a psychological issue, which at this point in time, the Ethiopian side seems to be in short supply.
Thank you, Faisal. It's interesting about the POWs from Bata Dabele to other government offices. They were fast to disown them when they were shown on New York Times and everywhere last year. And like you were mentioning, but they were also fast to integrate them again back and send them. Skal, back to you.
If I start with reaction to what the spokesperson at the White House said, I'm not sure Mike Hammer is a special envoy of the president. He reports now to the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. So I'm not even sure that he is the special envoy of the President of the United States when he's reporting to a lower level official in the State Department. Second, the way that she characterizes the situation, that Eritrea's re-entry is condemned, Tigray should not expand beyond Tigray region, and Ethiopia, the aerial attack, she condemned the aerial attack, that Ethiopia should cease and desist from aerial attacks. That's almost useless to say. Eritrea should not enter. That's a fact. That doesn't require the White House to pronounce that Eritrea should not be a part of Ethiopia, because if another country is participating across the border in another sovereign state, that is called an aggression. So which government is going to say that is right? An aggression is an aggression for what it is. That the press secretary of the President of the United States is simply belaboring a fact. It's almost maddening to me that they're saying that. What must Tigray do? What must Tigray do? Simply starve to death in Tigray when they are under complete and total siege, have been under total siege for more than a year, and because including the time since the November 2020, the Tigray region had been under siege. The only thing that the siege had done to anyone in that area is beyond starving the Tigrayan people and killing children. The only thing that it did is simply led to the increase of contraband trade and contrabandists. That's all it did. On Ethiopia, it's the aerial bombardment. That is the one thing that they call is offensive to them. How about the siege? Which by my count, by the way, today is 620th day. The 620th day of a complete siege in Tigray. So the press statement is not something that one should accept as a serious proposition. Mike Hammer could go back, but he was there about 2 weeks ago. Nothing changed. He could not even stop the resumption of the war. I don't think the United States is in any position at this moment in time to make any difference. For three reasons. Number one, as we talked last time, there is a tough battle between the Special Envoy office, the Office of the Special Envoy, and the State Department, and that had led to some kind of inertia that had descended into immobility. The second is they're afraid of China, so they don't want to pressure the Ethiopian government into the arms of China. And thirdly, there is a midterm election coming, and the Democrats or the White House is afraid that in some districts where there is a disproportionate number of Ethiopians, the election might be skewed towards the opponents. So for three reasons, I don't think they're engaged in any meaningful intervention in the Ethiopian in the Tigray crisis. On the other hand, on the reaction outside the international community, which is basically reduced to saying we are concerned about the escalation, we are worried about them, we are calling upon both sides to do anything. These are simply tired statements. I don't think they would do anything, and I don't think they're going to do anything on the ground. Understandably so from the Tigrayan perspective, that they don't have the Tigrayan people don't have to die. The duration of conflict, which started in 2020, cannot be prolonged. It only prolongs the suffering of humanity in the Tigray region. That said, this war is basically different. The second round of war is different. In Addis Ababa, and just to be quick about making my remarks, in the capital city there is a cloud of indifference. People are simply saying, "Who cares?" It is as if they have resigned to accepting fate, that this war is going to play out, a winner would come out, and it doesn't matter. For Addis Ababa residents, it doesn't really matter. In fact, they have resigned to accepting that the second coming of the TPLF would probably suit better than the current state of affairs, which I could go into, but not necessarily important. In the Amhara region, the Amhara region had proposed to recruit more, or to organize more recruits to simply be mobilized and go to the war front to become a human wave. What they did was, in the Amhara region, was to forgive the microcredit that were given to farmers by the Amhara state government if they enrolled. Second, they also announced that any male person that has a rifle should join, and the rifle would be replaced by a Kalashnikov. And third, if anybody that doesn't have anything is enrolled, that they're going to be put on a payroll. The response from the Amhara region was pathetic. And now you could see an Aben spokesperson saying that just because we have political differences, that doesn't mean we're not going to have to fight to save the country. In the Oromia region, there is a war going on its own. In the Somali region, I spoke to someone in Jijiga, but Faisal may have better contacts than I. The attitude, the feeling is one of some kind of euphoria that the Somali region's former enemies are at each other, and that would probably be a relief for Somali region after 70 years of massacre, that when the two antagonists are at each other's throat, that would provide a relief for Somali region. I can go on describing other places, but in general, what I would say is the euphoria and the fervor, the patriotic fervor that supported the first round of war, the Tigray war, the bedeviling of anyone who is Tigrayan, and the demonization of the TPLF is conspicuously absent today.
Thank you, Zgal. Yusuf, I want to be very specific on your contribution in the segment in terms of Eritrea's role here. So one thing that I want to play is what the Ethiopian ambassador to the US said on TNN today. Just pointed question on Eritrea's role. And then I would show our viewers as well what 2 days earlier, maybe one day, the Eritrean ambassador to Kenya and Tanzania, and representing his country in UNEP and the UN Habitat, also posted on Twitter, and you'll react to that.
Is Eritrea involved in fighting in the north?
Not at all. We don't have information on that. We hear on social media, etc. TPLF has got this behavior of attracting, Eritrea to enter into the conflict by sending, some.
Do you want Eritrea involved in this fight? Do you condone Eritrean forces involved? And if they are, and it's not your knowledge, but say they are, what will the Ethiopian government do? What is your main stance on Eritrea getting involved?
Between Eritrea and the rest of Ethiopia, except the Tigray region, there is Tigray region itself. Ethiopia has no access to look at those issues.
That's Ambassador Seleshi Bekele, to Ethiopian ambassador to the US. And this is another ambassador, Eritrean ambassador to Kenya and Tanzania, talking about the war. So this is 7 hours after Tigray announced Eritrea is in a joint operation. Within 7 hours, he posted this. So this is the English translation. The wise learn from the mistakes of others, but the TPLF, he calls them Chefra. That's how Isaias calls Chefra Wayana. The TPLF multiplies mistakes, but it will not have a chance to make another mistake anymore, because it will not continue, or it will not exist. And he says, victory to the Eritrean Defense Forces and the Eritrean people is inevitable. Peace to peoples of the Horn of Africa. This is Ambassador Beyene Rusom. For our viewers, his wife is in prison because of the regime he serves. Joseph, back to you. You're muted, I guess.
Okay, back to Eritrea. Yeah. As I said before, Eritrea is in panic mode right now. It never expected that the Ethiopian forces would collapse at this extent and at this rate. So what happened was the moment the southern front collapsed, Eritrea was in a dilemma because up to that point, what it wanted to do was its focus was on the western part of Tigray, on the Humera front. The reason is obvious. Never the number one credo of Eritrea throughout this war has been never let Tigray have a corridor to Sudan. The moment it gains a corridor to Sudan, the war is over. And that logic makes sense. But Eritrea has panicked so much at this point in time. Instead of reinforcing the military, the Endf and the rest, in Western Tigray, what it did was instead it transferred more about one is, I don't know exactly the number, but it comes to tens of thousands. I don't know how many divisions one is, but they were saying tens of thousands of Ethiopian forces were transferred to Eritrea, simply because prior to the Western Front, the fear was that the Eritrean front would collapse. So this is a calculation that brought Eritrea to undertake this step. Now, having done that, now it is again in another dilemma, because the Eritrean forces, there is a lot of, as one of the generals used to say, I think it was Tadesse Warede, Hatsawin. In Eritrea right now, the army is full of Hatsawin, which means full of equipment, but not that many conscripts. In fact, from the reports that we get from Eritrea, thousands of youths are making it to the Sudan every month. Thousands of youths are escaping to the Sudan. There have been also reports about young men, especially in the villages, hiding in the forest or whatever baraha they find in Eritrea. So that has been in every place. For example, in an area around Seganeti, another one was in Maragus, another one was in Gullij area. In all of these areas, they came in every household. Whenever those kids are not there, then they take the kettle. Sometimes they close their homesteads, and in many cases the parents are being taken to prison precisely because they couldn't bring their kids back. Either they are hiding somewhere, or they have made it all the way to Eritrea, to Sudan. Now, here is a question that Eritrea is facing right now. To fight, which means to fight inside Tigray, there is a difference. It has been up to now, mainly what it has been doing is it has been using its overwhelming artillery superiority in attacking certain areas of Tigray, especially the Sheraro Badme area. In that area, the moment it comes out of its trenches inside Tigray, the fear is two things. First, Eritrea cannot take many casualties, precisely because of what I have said. The second thing that the Sha'biya is terrified is that if this war continues for 4 or 5 days, and then there could be a push and pull inside in that area. If they get into Eritrea, then it will exactly it will happen exactly what has happened in Ethiopia. The entire Eritrean army could collapse. So I think that dilemma is still working out right now inside the in that border area. I'm not sure exactly what they would do. My fear is that if they think that the Ethiopian army is not salvageable anymore, then they would probably prefer to stay in their trenches and fight defensively. If they cancel, if they already cancel out, I mean, if they already believe that the Ethiopian army is no more salvageable. Now, here is the last card that Isaias is using right now. Remember, at the time the TDF went all the way to Debre Berhan, to the gates of Addis Ababa, the main reason why they came back was because the Western world didn't want to give up on Isaias. They didn't want to give up on Isaias. That was one of the main reasons. Sorry, on Abiy. They didn't want to give up on Abiy. Now, Isaias is using that last word. He is telling the Western world, the only way you could salvage Abiy is by salvaging me. That is the last card that left for him. Exactly the same way that the Western Tigray has been used in this game. If you have looked at the Secretary of State response, you could notice that the U.S. is has been very much comfortable with the status quo. The status quo means the siege of Tigray. They don't see any end game to this, but they were comfortable on the status quo. Being comfortable on the status quo means not letting Tigray occupy Western Tigray. That is the key to all of this game. Do not let Tigray occupy Western Tigray, because that will be the end of the game. So if they are to bring, according to them, if they are to mediate between Abiy and the TPLF, if they are to find a middle ground in between the two, it could only be done while Tigray is under siege. That has been the modus operandi of the West in general, although they have never said that explicitly. Now, what Isaias is saying is, you might lose Western Tigray. Right now, we might lose Western Tigray if you don't work with me. The only way you could salvage Abiy is by salvaging me. That is the kind of message that he is sending right now. So we'll see how it will go. But that's exactly, would they do it? That is the question. Would they salvage Isaias, for example? Because right at this moment, the Eritreans are hoping that there will be the regime change is in the air. It's not only the Somalis, as Hezkel have been saying, and the others that are being ecstatic as a result of this war. Eritreans too are counting the days. They say the days of Isaias has almost come to an end. But the question is, what will the Western world and the Arab friends of Isaias, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the rest of them, are willing to do at this point in time? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yusuf. We are going to the last section of this, and it looks like everyone is agreeing that Addis Ababa, Asmara, they are in full force of just maybe as a final solution, a final war. One indication is there is a lot of explicit transport of soldiers, weapons by Ethiopian Airlines. Last year, as you remember, CNN did a report on that, but nothing seems to have changed in terms of this using Ethiopian Airlines commercial aircrafts to transport weapons and soldiers. This very famous account on Twitter, Gerdron, Dutch-based, I guess, he has been reporting the last 3-4 days how many crafters, which flight number was making from the air cargo I think, part of the airport, and he was actually saying the flights were going from the cargo apron, hiding from visibility, all that, and so on. So there is a list of um, flights after flights, at least 8 per day, flying to Lalibela, to the sea, to the northern Ethiopia, as he puts it here. And so what do we expect, or what do we see happening? It's very difficult, I know, to predict, but what does the panel see happening in the coming days, given also the Mike Hammer is going, and given also the what's happening in the on the Eritrean side, maybe possibility of also something's changing in the Western Tigray as well. Faisal?
Well, I think this war, both in the north as well as in Oromia, in this particular juncture, is a historic war. It will be for many, many years to come. Whoever wins will be analyzed. It will impact the lives of millions of people in that part of the world. It will be one of those that you teach, just like the second so happened. This happened. I think this war is going to be like that, and it will be more impacting than probably what we realize. As I was listening to this press secretary, and then we were discussing this haphazard, conflict, opening different fronts, new fronts, opening up all the wounds, new wounds coming up, human carnage and all that. I was just reflecting and asking myself, with Hammer, Envoy Hammer going to Addis, what is today? I mean, if you ask it today, what is the U.S. policy towards Ethiopia? What is if anybody asks what's the U.S. policy towards Ukraine, we know very well that the U.S. wants Russia to be defeated, and the U.S. will do anything possible with its allies throughout the world to help the refugees, to open corridors, to use some of the most sophisticated U.S. weapons to make sure that Ukraine wins and Russia loses. That is the U.S. policy towards the Ukraine-Russia conflict. What's the U.S. policy towards Ethiopia? In a nutshell, if you really don't skirt around and don't become diplomatic, the U.S.'s official unspoken policy, but we have gathered from discussions and from reading materials, is to maintain Abiy, period. So if that's the U.S. policy, to continue Prime Minister Abiy's policy as much as possible, everything else is an offshoot of that, and they would want everything to conform to that. To them, it's very easy to say Eritrea out, which is, something that they have always had. They never had a good relationship with Eritrea as far as the U.S. State Department is concerned. But when you come to this is what I started with my conversation, when you come to the Achilles heels of this issue, which was the siege and the starving of millions of people in Tigray who could become cannibalism could take place if you don't do anything. That is not a primary, nor a secondary, nor a tertiary for the U.S. government from public policy level. As Joseph indicated, it just happens that some Tigrayans are just, talking and having some issues and some problem. We will talk to Abiy to see if he can do something. And that's what they have been doing. From the official books of Abiy, he is telling them, when he's asking why the war now happened and it's restarted, he's saying, we were trying to open up the channel of communication to resume services, to slowly but surely take the siege and remove, but TPLF could not wait. That is really an indication of the US government, as Joseph aptly put it, not even in a hurry when it comes to the siege. Whereas for TPLF, TDF, the siege is a shock of 7 million people and it's do or die. So I think whether Hammer goes back to Addis or not, I think he will still talk to Prime Minister Abiy and his team within the framework that the US government is behind Abiy. Now, everything else is a detail, and we have talked about the detail quite a lot. And I think that is, in my opinion, the source of TDF, TPLF frustration, political and military frustration, is they very well know, dealing with the US government for the last year and a half, they very well know what the US stands. They came to realize now that US is not playing an even card. US is adamant and probably told them in private, we want Abiy to stay. Because if they did not, they would have broken the siege in many ways, including pressuring Abiy, and they have not pressured when it comes to the sea. This is a government and a country and a system of the West that literally allowed millions of US dollars to Abiy right days or 1 or 2 days before the war started. So why, even if you were Abiy, why would you think the West would do anything negative to you when you know that, in the middle of the war, they are sending largesse of cash and everything. So I think the conflict, as somebody from that region, the sad story is the conflict doesn't have a mediator. This conflict only has belligerents and warriors, two sides that will kill each other to death. If the US is trying to tell the outside world and its voters and its humanitarian groups that it's mediating the Ethiopian Tigray conflict, they are lying to us, and I think they are playing games. The US government wants to maintain Addis Ababa, wants to support Addis Ababa, and wants to piecemeal, if any solution, piecemeal, not radical change, because the dying people are not that much of a concern. After all, they are black people, they're Africans. That's when you know American policy and American cultural politics. I don't think there's an urgency when 6 million Africans are in siege. I think it would have had urgency if 6 million white people were in siege. That's the reality. And I think America wants to talk to us in a very serious manner. And I think the press secretary's, as Scale said, the press secretary's presentation was a lukewarm. It was just a very lame press release.
Thank you, Faisal. Scale on the same question, but also this is Redwan Hussein sharing about government from the Ministry of Finance, I guess, where they share a number of accounts, government bank accounts for Ethiopians in the diaspora to contribute. So we have talked in this panel, yourself involved in terms of the economy or the war economy. And what are we seeing there as well, if you can reflect on that? But on the same topic of what do we see play out, unfold in the coming days or weeks?
I think what would unfold in the coming days is something that was baked in the cake a long time ago. The Ethiopian National Defense Force right now is not a fighting force. And I'm going to say why I say that. But it's kind of baked in the cake is that what was created as the Ethiopian National Defense Force, I think in around 2000, as the embryo of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. If you remember, when the EPRDF was in power, there was so much complaint that it was dominated by Tigrayan officers. From what I know, the Ethiopian, at the beginning of this war, or at the beginning of the Abiy Ahmed's tenure, there were many generals, Tigrayan generals, who are now commanders in the TDF, colonels, majors, and other officers at different levels of the military. Abiy started to purge the generals before the war, and when the war started, he basically imprisoned and purged many of the generals, as many as maybe 50 generals, about 120 colonels, and about 300 majors. If any military, because the military is a command and control structure, any military that loses that much capacity, you can multiply and see what it means to lose 50 generals, because it requires about 30 years to create a general, to a general officer. 30 times 50, you can calculate it. What I meant by that is that the Ethiopian military was basically a defeated military at the beginning of this war. The rest of the general staff, were, including the field marshal, was a former POW. And POWs have certain characteristics from their behavior. That is, because they are captured, they are defeated, they are broken, they are dejected, and they actually know the enemy, and they get to establish relationships and develop sympathies for the enemy, for the apparent enemy. So the generals in the Ethiopian army that are now commanding the Ethiopian army are not. They've already lost most that kind of capacity, and they are former captives. So the Ethiopian military itself is really hollowed out. And what was left of the Ethiopian military was basically broken and destroyed by the Tigrayan war. We remember all of that. Since then, using the negotiations negotiations to buy time, they were rounding up young people from cities, young people who are unemployed, and retraining them in the major training centers. But these were not converted to a fighting force. Those are the ones that they are simply throwing to the fire today. So when this war started, this round of war started on August 23, and this speaks to capacity. On August 23, the day before the start of this war, the Ethiopian military intelligence, the Ethiopian intelligence system itself, the Ethiopian politicos, and the media, and everybody had concluded, their assessment concluded, that the Tigray war is not going to resume. The day before, that Tigray is broken, the Tigray military doesn't have the arsenals that it needs to conduct a war, and the people do not have the stamina to withstand any more siege and any more military hardware. They will just bring pressure to bear on the TPLF, and the TPLF would surrender. That was the calculation on August 23. They were utterly surprised. One of the reasons that we saw the complete breakdown of about 23 divisions in the southern front, and even the loss in the western front from the Tigray side and on the Abergele side, all of that should be explained by what I just described. That this military is not a military that could win a war. It could prolong war. It could throw human beings at this fire, but it's not going to win. Therefore, what is going to happen? For the Ethiopian military to win, it needs economic support. The political system to prosecute the war, to conduct the war, it needs political cohesion and the support of the people. All three are not available right now. Like I described earlier, the patriotic fervor that surrounded the first round has basically dissipated right now. People have resigned to apathy and indifference. The political system, the PP, the Prosperity Party, have now started pointing out to each other as the party to blame. The Amhara party is blaming each other. The Oromia party is saying we have our own fight with the Shane or the OLA over here. We cannot go to the Tigray war. So there is an infighting within the political system, and a political system that doesn't have an internal political cohesion cannot face an enemy and cannot conduct a war to successful conclusion. What the international community is going to do, I don't know. This war could be prolonged. When it will end, I don't know. If the international community wants to intervene at this point in time, they might start by pressuring UAE not to give the Ethiopian military more smart bombs to kill children in Tigray. They could do that if they want to. If they really want to take a step in the right direction, that's what they need to do. They're not going to do that. So this war is going to drag on, or probably conclude by a victory of one side. And that is what I see would happen in the next months.
Thank you, Stel. Yosef, one thing that is not getting enough coverage is how the Eritrean diaspora has shifted over the past months in terms of its relationship with the ruling party in Asmara. So we have seen, I think, country after country, from Switzerland to the UK, Sweden, Germany, I guess, as well, where the normal, parties, so to speak, were not going on as usual. So with that dynamics, and you were mentioning about people are counting down the last maybe days of Isaias Afwerki. How do you see this play out in the coming days and years? So if you can speak to what's happening within the Eritrean opposition politics as well. You are muted if you are speaking.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
No, I can't hear you.
You're right. Yeah. Lately, probably the last few weeks, usually what the Isaias regime does is it gets its money from the diaspora. Not only the 2% that it extracts, 2% tax it extracts from diaspora people, but also from various festivals that it conducts everywhere in America, in Europe, and Australia, and all those places. Every year they conduct huge festivals in many places in diaspora. This year they tried it 6 times and it failed 6 times. The reason why it failed was the Eritrean youth became very militant. They didn't simply demonstrate. That they used to do before and it never worked. This time they became very militant. For example, I think it was in Gießen in Germany. The battle went on for a while in between the opposition forces and the regime supporters. The fight was with stones and sticks, and many of the police were hurt. Not only the festival goers, but also even I heard 6 or 7 of the police were hurt during that. It was almost a big riot. So in every place, beginning from Norway to Denmark to not Sweden, that was the only exception because it happened earlier, but in the rest of them, in Germany, in England, in all of them, they managed to stop the festivals. This is a trend that has been going. Probably people have not been looking at this trend precisely because the show was being stolen by the supporters of the Isaias regime. One of the things that has been happening, for example, politically is, as I mentioned with you at one time, there is a new movement called Felsi, or the Seedling for Peace and Democracy in Eritrea, that has been growing in, very fast. So there is a movement among the opposition to say, this thing has to stop. And for the first time, thousands of them are saying, we will work with Tigray. Not only in sympathizing with what they are going, but even if it requires fighting on the ground, we will do it. We'll work with Tigray because we have a common enemy in Asmara. So that has been a huge shift in mentality among the Eritreans, I believe. So it has been a rather remarkable weeks, I would say. In fact, months, if you look at the political shift among the diaspora Eritreans. Having said that, let me say a few words on what Hezkel and Faisal has been saying in regard to the reaction of the outside world when it comes to Tigray. If you have seen, I think the main problem have been Ethiopia, the US and the EU have been trying to find a middle ground between Abiy and Tigray. It's an impossible mission. There is no such middle ground. There is no a middle ground to be had in between a genocider and its victims. The Tigrayans already know that. If they have been cornered into the negotiation table, they knew that this is not going to lead anywhere. So if Mike Hammer and the rest of them are trying to find a solution to this problem, they have to know exactly, they have to have an end game. They have to see an end game to this. To me, it has always been Western Tigray. They will have to acknowledge that Western Tigray is part of Tigray. Once you do that, I'm 100% sure the Ethiopian government will say, okay, it will have to come to some kind of a conclusion to this problem. The idea of trying to find a middle ground between this regime and it's the same way trying to find a middle ground between Eritrea and Tigray. These are the three forces: the Eritrean forces, the Amhara forces, and the Ethiopian forces are the three partners in crime in the genocide of Tigray. There is no way you could compromise. You could bring a compromise in between these three forces. So that's what I think. If there is going to be a solution to this, it will have to be from the Western world, and the Western world have to know that there is no solution to this half-baked solution to this problem. Will they do it? Up to now, it has become impossible. They have taken the Tigray problem, in fact, the Tigray war, as a proxy war of Ukrainian war. Imagine, the Tigray war has been going on for more than a year before the Ukrainian war started, but the Ukrainian war has become the main war, and the Tigrayan war is being taken as a proxy war of that war, precisely because America wants to hold on to Ethiopia. It wants the Africans and the Ethiopians to be on its side when it comes to the war in Ukraine and the Chinese problem, and as a result of that, Tigray is being sacrificed precisely because of that. Unless they change, they began to see the problem as it is. I don't think this war will have a quick end. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. I will give you maybe 1 minute each if you want to use for final thought. But before that, we haven't covered a lot, but there are opposition parties in Ethiopia that also issued a number of statements this week. For example, this what you see on the screen is the Oromo Liberation Front in a press statement to the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, to people in Oromia, and to the international community, denouncing the resumption of or re-escalation of the war, and outlining a number of points in terms of what Abiy forces have been doing in Tigray as well as in Oromia. A number of them opposing, specifically those who were supporting the first round, a couple of parties, I don't have the press release from, they come together and oppose the war, the resumption of the war, and so on. So, final thoughts, Faisal.
Well, I think the only thing at this point in time that we need to focus on are two things. One is the war, where this war will head to, how it will end. I think those are big questions, and probably we will get some kind of clarity in the coming few days. If TDF progresses on its western front and also gets control of the southern mountainous regions around Sokoto and that area, then probably two things can come out of that. Either they will hold on grounds and stay there for a long time and then be open to negotiation while they are not leaving, because last time they have to back off and left and moved back. This time, given, and I'll touch that quickly, given what the envoy may or will not say, I think it's unlikely that TDF will move back anytime soon from the areas that they occupy. Because last time, whatever promise or agreement given, it didn't work. So will they stay there? The second thing we don't know much, and we will know in the coming few days, is if there is any significant collaboration between OLA and TDF. Because TDF alone would have a mountain to really grind if they don't, to defeat Abiy's regime, if they don't have OLA. I think the choker card is in the pocket of OLA, which whether the OLA would also be moving towards Addis Ababa from the south and collaborate and coordinate with with TDF. Having said that, I am really curious, and I don't want to prematurely comment on that, but what would Mike Hammer bring from Addis? He's going there. He's going to be guest of Abiy, and Abiy is in the middle of a huge war. Is he going to convince Abiy to pull out from and let TDF hold onto the areas that it has? Is he going to tell Abiy to stop and freeze everything that they have, which TDF may agree if they don't have to pull back? Would he change his position to this time break within a short period of time the siege? So if the siege is broken, then talks can probably initiate. We don't know. If he just taking a little, small talk to Addis Ababa, stay there for a few days and come back, I don't think he will change anything. But if he takes a huge carrot to TDF, which can be implemented before TDF moves back, i.e., removing the siege, opening humanitarian help, and also, as Joseph touched, coming into terms with the issue of Western Tigray, then maybe a new form of negotiation can start, and America would have relevance. At this point, America doesn't have any relevance because the two belligerents moved away and moved on in terms of what they want to do. And I'm very curious to see what Mike will bring back to DC after he comes back.
Thanks, Faisal. Askia?
I guess this talk about unencumbered, unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray, which is badly needed, or cessation of hostilities, or restoration or resumption of public services such as banks and communications and other government services to Tigray. The language itself seems a little dated right now to me, because this was the language before the re-escalation. The re-escalation is the result of these demands not being met. The re-escalation is the result of the Ethiopian government sitting down the two military leaders sitting down, hammering out this step by step what would be done to achieve ceasefire, and then the Ethiopian government coming out and declaring its own unilateral humanitarian truce. So the language, these languages, as important as humanitarian access in the restoration of public services, as important as they are languages from the re-escalation. I think more is going to be needed this time. There is a civil war raging in Ethiopia, and this raging civil war is the result of a misguided effort by the Prosperity Party to set back the clock on the gains that the Ethiopian nations and nationalities have made in the last 50, 60 years for democracy and for self-rule. The notion that the nations and nationalities of Ethiopia would accept an arrangement whereby the Prosperity Party would impose a unitary political entity made up of assimilated citizens and on top of all of the hierarchy would be an autocrat. I mean, this is just not achievable. It doesn't make any sense. It's not conceptually coherent. This is not going to be accepted. So what Ethiopia needs is, as these technical issues are achieved, even the notion that Tigray breaking out of the siege. Let's say Tigray captured Western Tigray, was freed, and the border to Sudan was opened. Even that is a technical solution. It's not going to resolve the underlying causes of the civil war. So unless there is a civil war, unless there is a comprehensive approach, an internal movement from within Ethiopia's political forces, and then external help to reimagine Ethiopia and resolve the problems that are related to this civil war in a comprehensive manner, there will be no Ethiopia. There will be absolutely no Ethiopia. And if it is going to go down, the question is who will be presiding over the disintegration of Ethiopia. So I think we have to go back to the roots of the problem and resolve them. A new political settlement and reimagination of Ethiopian state is needed at this point in time.
Thank you, Uzgel. There has been a number of interests from UMD Media to talk about these big issues on H panel, but unfortunately, so far we are caught in this, current affairs. Otherwise, reimagining Ethiopia, the root causes, what is the interest of the people and the political elites, all that is something that we have tabled for topics here at the H panel. So we'll hopefully get back to them.
I think I think this war, and however this war, pans out, would probably be opening doors for that very question that Scale raised. I think the war is hiding, and it's a camouflage for this kind of issues to be raised on both sides. Ethiopia's existential philosophy is on the table, and that cannot be done through war. It has to be really undone after the war, and I totally agree. You're right.
Thank you. Yusuf, the final thought is yours.
Okay. I sometimes think that had TDF not marched to Addis Ababa and instead marched to Asmara, this war would have come to an end by now. If so, even now, I believe this war will not end on the road to Addis Ababa or on the road to Sudan. I think it will end on the road to Asmara. That's how I feel. Because the Eritrean government already knows that. it realizes that, I mean, you could tell the gut feeling of the Isaias regime. That's why it is hesitating. The moment it decides to enter inside Tigray, I mean, its army to enter inside her, not the way it's doing right now. It knows that most probably the war will be fought inside Eritrean soil. And the moment it's being fought inside Eritrean soil, everything comes to an end. Because, I mean, the idea of Western Tigray and reaching Addis Ababa becomes secondary. It becomes an end because it started with Eritrea and they definitely will end in Eritrea. That's how I feel. That's it.
Thank you, Yosef. I think my understanding through UMD Media, many Tigrayans have expressed that the road to Asmara would have undone everything in terms of even the complexities, the Bahar Dar, Addis Ababa, Asmara axis, all that, because Asmara is understood as the hub of connecting these dots and flexibly doing so and so on. So we'll hopefully follow up on that, and hopefully TDF4 commanders hear you. That's, I think, the wish of many Tigrayans I spoke to anyway. But thank you for your time, everyone. And this is, I think, was an insightful show. And sorry for taking your time, but this was an important topic. Good night from here. You've been following us live on UMD Media, and this will be aired as well in the Horn of Africa on satellite, on Yasat satellite, as part of Horn Broadcasting Services. Good night from here. See you on yet another show. Bye.